no matter what we're dealing with, there were always things that came before. There are always deeper sources and causes. And I would say if you want to understand how Friends United meeting has developed and evolved over the 20th and 21st centuries, you have to go back to the early 19th century. Remember, this is a time when Quakerism is confined to the British Isles and North America, almost entirely the United States in the latter case. And the 19th century is a time when American Quakers have what one English friend referred to as a genius for division. First, in the 1820s, you have American Friends dividing into Hicksite and Orthodox groups over issues of scriptural authority, Christology, and power. And we'll put the Hicksites, who later become Friends General Conference, aside for now. We will come back to them. The Orthodox Friends, which take views of Christology and biblical authority that are largely similar to those you would have found among most Protestants at that time, in turn, in the 1830s and 1840s and 1850s, divide into two other groups who become known as Gurneyite and Wilburite Friends. The Wilburites are the unyielding conservatives, the never give an inch primitivists who want to hold on to the old ways as they understand them. And again, we will put them aside for now. Gurneyite Friends are a substantial majority, not just of Orthodox Friends, but of all Friends in North America. And they are Friends who are largely open to influences from the larger culture around them, whether it be in North America or in the British Isles. And in the case of Gurneyites here in North America, they are the ones who are recognized as the legitimate Quakers by Friends in Ireland and London yearly meetings. And that gives Gurneyism a legitimacy that is important to them. Gurneyite Quakerism is evangelical. It emphasizes the authority of Scripture, the experience of a distinctive new birth. But at the same time, it also emphasizes what we would today think of as Quaker distinctives, what they would have then called peculiarities, such as unprogrammed worship, the ministry of women, what we refer to today as the peace testimony, an emphasis on doing good in the larger world through anti-slavery or prison reform or defense of the rights of Native Americans. At the same time, Gurneyite Friends are largely moving closer to the larger cultures of the world around them. And a good example of that is that in the 1850s and 1860s, Gurneyite yearly meetings revised their disciplines so they are no longer disowning Friends for marrying non-Quakers, for example. And that is seen as a substantial change. And other rules, such as a definite requirement of wearing plain dress or using plain language, are being relaxed. One result of this movement closer to the larger culture here in the United States comes with the development of a revival movement in the 1860s and 1870s, where full-blown fire and brimstone, unrestrained revival techniques are introduced into most Gurneyite Friends meetings. Baltimore Yearly Meeting is the exception, but from New England to the West Coast, you have a wave of revivalism that produces dramatic change. And probably the most dramatic of all of these changes was the development of a pastoral system of ministry in the 1870s and 1880s. By the 1890s, again, all of the Gurneyite yearly meetings with the exception of Baltimore Yearly Meeting, have embraced a pastoral system of ministry. And it's often forgotten that in the Gurneyite New York and New England yearly meetings, a majority of congregations were pastoral by the early 20th century. Such rapid change almost inevitably created controversy. And I'll talk about some of that controversy in a moment. Some of those issues included the nature of the new birth. A death and conversion experience is accepted as necessary by all Gurneyite friends, but must it be instantaneous? Can it be gradual? How important are Quaker distinctives, ways that friends have traditionally separated themselves from other Protestant denominations? That becomes an issue. Community, defining community, becomes an issue for Gurneyite friends. Should emphasis be on Quakers as a community, or should community be defined as Quakers being simply one of a number of evangelical Protestant groups, so that evangelical Christians committed to aggressive soul saving becomes the community that many Gurneyite friends are defining themselves as part of? Then there's the nature of sanctification or holiness, which is very important to Gurneyite friends at this time. By the 1880s, there are rather impassioned disputes over whether outward sacraments, water baptism especially, should become part of Gurneyite Quakerism, or at least be tolerated. Another important development after 1860 among Gurneyite friends is the development of a missionary movement. By 1890, you have Gurneyite Quaker missionaries working in India, in Mexico, in Japan, in China, Jamaica, on Madagascar. Of course, what's going to be the most important of Quaker missionary movements in Africa and in Latin America develop after 1900, but again, they are the fruits of Gurneyite Quakerism. So you've got a lot of change taking place very quickly. And so there are attempts to try to rationalize this, to bring order to all of this. And the most important of these efforts came in a conference that was held here in Richmond in the autumn of 1887. It included representatives from not only all of the Gurneyite yearly meetings, but from London yearly meeting, from the yearly meeting in Dublin, and sympathetic friends from Philadelphia yearly meeting, the Orthodox Philadelphia yearly meeting, whose relationship with other Orthodox friends at this time is complicated, and I won't begin to try to explain that. Just take my word for it, it's complicated. Um, Two important developments come out of the Richmond Conference of 1887. The first is a commitment to holding future conferences, and those future conferences will eventually lead to the founding of the 5 years meeting of Friends in North America, what eventually becomes Friends United Meeting. So the foundations for FUM as an organization, an institution, are laid at the Richmond Conference of 1887. Secondly, as I assume most, if not all of you know, the Richmond Conference approves a declaration of faith, a statement of what these friends believe Quakerism is. The Richmond Declaration of Faith, of course, is a strongly evangelical statement of Quaker faith, pretty much reflects Gurneyite Quakerism as it was in the 1880s. But there's something else you should keep in mind about the Richmond Declaration of Faith. Although it's approved by the conference as a whole, and it is endorsed more or less by all of the Gurneyite yearly meetings in North America. It was written almost entirely by three individual friends. Joseph Bevan Braithwaite from London Yearly Meeting, James C. Thomas from Baltimore Yearly Meeting, and James E. Rhodes from Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. Wow. So in short, these are yearly meetings that are going to move in a different direction in the 20th century, but it shows you something about where those yearly meetings were at the time. Tells you something about how representative the Richmond Declaration was at the time. So in short, you've got issues here that the Richmond Conference thought it was resolving. Of course, it didn't, because you've got some other developments taking place. By 1880, there is yet another intellectual or spiritual trend in world Quakerism. And this is the development of what we usually refer to as modernism. This is part of a larger movement in the theological world in Western Europe and in North America. It found devotees, supporters among both Hicksite and Orthodox friends on both sides of the Atlantic. After 1880, modernism or liberalism, you can use the two interchangeably, although you can agree there are some differences, becomes extremely powerful in London yearly meeting. So that by the 1920s, it's become the dominant outlook there. Here in North America, Hicksite friends are largely drawn toward modernism by 1900, but a number of Orthodox Gurneyite friends, most notably Rufus Jones, become articulate advocates of a modernist vision of Quakerism. Modernism also becomes extremely influential in the colleges that Quakers have founded in North America, especially Haverford, Swarthmore, Earlham, Guilford, Wilmington, Whittier, Penn College, what's now William Penn to a lesser extent, French University, even less than that. Modernism in the Quaker world means an emphasis on the inward or inner life as the heart of Quakerism. An emphasis on Quaker distinctives like the peace testimony. An approval and embrace of critical modern biblical scholarship. And a strong skepticism about revivalism as part of Quaker spirituality and worship. Modernists, without question, are a minority in the North American Quaker world, but because they are articulate, because they are well educated, they find themselves probably with disproportionate influence in the Quaker world. Very often, these are people who are teaching in the colleges, serving as leaders in yearly meetings, and having considerable influence in the 5 Years meeting when it is founded in 1902. Discussions about forming a national organization of Gurneyite American yearly meetings began in 1887, was followed up by conferences held in Indianapolis in 1892 and 1897. In 1902, you get the formal organization of a 5 years meeting of Friends in America. All of the yearly meetings joining it agree to abide by a uniform discipline. And they also agree to turn over organizations that had been formed at a yearly meeting level, most notably missionary organizations, to a centralized mission board. The advocates of a 5 years meeting of Friends include in the uniform discipline a set of what they call essential beliefs or doctrines. And it's important to keep in mind that that set of essential beliefs was drawn up by Rufus Jones and James Wood of New York Yearly Meeting. So again, this is not what we think of as the strongly evangelical yearly meetings that are shaping policy at this time. Significantly, though, one Gurneyite yearly meeting in North America, Ohio yearly meeting, refused to join the 5 years meeting because it did not think that the 5 years meeting was sufficiently evangelical. It saw too much room for heresy in the 5 years meeting as it was being established. After 1912, the 5 years meeting takes on many of the characteristics of a Protestant denominational headquarters or overarching organization. Headquarters are established here in Richmond. The American Friend, which had been founded by Rufus Jones in 1894 and published in Philadelphia, is now moved to Richmond and is placed under control of the 5 years meeting. The 5 years meeting establishes boards on education, on mission, on peace, on temperance, on other issues, very similar to what you would have found in other Protestant denominations at the time. And it also finds itself almost from its foundation riven by controversies. Basically, modernists within the 5 years meeting facing off against friends in the 5 years meeting who are deeply influenced by the emerging fundamentalist movement in American Protestantism. You see these issues playing themselves out in every session of the 5 years meeting, from the first in 1902 into the 1940s. Issues over whether the Richmond Declaration of Faith and George Fox's letter to the governor of Barbados, which of course articulates Quakerism in terms that evangelicals find quite congenial. Are they part of the uniform discipline? Should they effectively be considered a statement of faith? That if not all friends in the 5 years meeting, at least those holding positions of authority and leadership should be required to subscribe to. What should be the nature of Quaker educational institutions? Should they be essentially liberal arts colleges like Earlham or Wilmington or Guilford? Or should they be essentially Bible training institutes, Bible colleges, like those evangelical friends are establishing in Cleveland or Huntington Park, California, or Westfield, Indiana, or Howland, Kansas? Ironically, of course, most of these are eventually going to develop into four-year colleges, but in the early 20th century, that is a fundamental difference. In short, the question is, how much room is there for diversity of belief, for tolerance within the 5 years meeting? This will remain a central controversy. By 1940, three yearly meetings have either left the 5 years meeting or have refused to join. Ohio refuses to join in the first place. Oregon yearly meeting leaves in 1925, 26. Kansas yearly meeting in 1937. Nebraska yearly meeting in the 1950s. All because they believe that the 5 years meeting is not sufficiently strongly enough committed to evangelical Christianity to aggressive soul saving. And eventually, these burning-eyed yearly meetings that didn't join in the first place, or which lead the 5 years meeting, will become Evangelical Friends International. Meanwhile, beginning in the 1940s, you have in the East reunion movements. Yearly meetings like New England, Baltimore, New York, that had divided in the 19th century, whose Gurneyite yearly meetings have been founders of the 5 years meeting. But now, in those yearly meetings, the old divisions between Orthodox and Hicksite Friends have become pretty much irrelevant. So that in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, you have reunions. This means you have yearly meetings like Baltimore and New York and New England staying in the 5 years meeting or Friends United meeting that also includes significant numbers of friends who historically have never had any ties to Orthodox Quakerism or to Quakerism as it was originally envisioned by the founders of the 5 years meeting. You also have a strong movement in 20th century Quakerism of other friends who want to see reunion among friends, who establish independent monthly meetings that either refuse to affiliate with any of the older divisions or take up joint affiliation. They affiliate with 2 yearly meetings, one of which is part of the 5 years meeting, the other which is part of Friends General Conference, which is what Hicksite Quakerism has become. And finally, of course, throughout the 20th century, you have the steady growth of pastoral friends outside of the United States, most significantly in Africa and Latin America. So this brings us down to the 1960s. You see changes in the 5 years meeting. Decision is made it's going to start holding sessions every 3 years. So it takes friends a little time, but they finally decide 5 years meeting is no longer accurate. So we become a Friends United meeting. The American Friend gets a new name when it becomes Quaker Light in 1960. And there is no question that the most significant growth in Friends United meeting is in East Africa. By the late 20th century, East African Friends substantially outnumber Friends in North America. Indeed, you have an inverse relationship here. The faster Quakerism grows in Africa, the faster the number of friends in North America is decreasing. Again, for complicated reasons I don't have time to go into here. It's becoming clear by the 1960s that there are substantial disagreements among the members of Friends United meeting about what the institution, the organization should be doing. To what extent should it align itself with social activism, especially peace activism, as you would have seen as exemplified by the American Friends Service Committee? With the influx of jointly affiliated yearly meetings, those that are part of both FUM and Friends General Conference, Quaker Universalism becomes an issue. Is Quakerism necessarily Christian, or is a divine light found in all faiths, or maybe in no faith at all? Is it possible, for example, to be a Jewish atheist Quaker? Your answer to that question will define probably where you're going to fall on a number of the other issues that are facing FUM at this time. By the 1970s, sexuality is becoming an issue. Should same-sex relationships be condemned as sinful or affirmed as a measure of Quaker tolerance and inclusion? Once again, the issue is one of defining community. For many friends in Friends United meeting, their identity is not so much as Quakers, but as evangelical Christians who feel far more in common with Wesleyans or Nazarenes than they do with those Quakers you find out on the East Coast or hanging around places like Earlham or Guilford or Whitney. On the other hand, you have friends for whom a sense of Quaker distinctiveness is absolutely vital to their faith and who define their faith in terms of affiliation with support of organizations like the American Friends Service Committee or Friends Committee on National Legislation or the Friends World Committee on Consultation. In short, Friends United meeting has been faced with the issue of how much diversity it can tolerate, whether diversity is a good thing, something to be embraced and celebrated, or something that is essentially a problem that leads us into controversies that distract us from what our focus should be, which is carrying the gospel message to a perishing world. And the result of those disagreements here in North America has been, over the last 20 years, yet a new round of separations. Final word, and here I am open to correction. My sense is that African friends in Friends United meeting have been aware of these controversies, but they have been so focused on building their own institutions, both as friends and as a decolonized nation or nations, uh, carrying out their own ministries that they have not felt themselves led to actively involve themselves in these tussles among North American friends. So that brings me to 29 minutes. I have engaged in a number of very broad jokes. I have probably confused you to a certain extent, and I will acknowledge that that may be partly intentional on my part because this is a really confusing world in which we live.
Realized as I was sitting here, we didn't introduce Tom. And there might be a couple of people in the room who never know him.
He's a man who needs no introduction.
No introduction.
He does need an introduction.
Who is he? For those of you who don't know, Tom Hamm has recently retired from the faculty of Earlham College. And he's most known for being the historian for the college and head of the archives. So if you sent any of your meeting minutes or anything else to the archives for the past however many years he worked there, he was the one who took care of that. And now it's Jenny Freed has taken his place.
And we are the archival repository for Friends United meetings. So we are in charge of your stuff.
Tom's book, The Transformation of North American Quakerism, if that's the right, is an integral part of really any understanding of Quakers in North America.
Yeah, if you want the long version, that is like.
Yeah, it's two in my office.
It's on Amazon, I know. And sometimes I see copies on eBay.
Say the title again.
The Transformation of American Quakerism, Orthodox Friends, 1800 to 1970.
Yeah, questions?
Yes.
Thank you. Sometimes I always say, when I grow up, I would like to know history of Quakerism like you. One of the things that From your explanation, it is very clear that whoever does not know his history, he doesn't know where he's going. From your talk, where do you foresee Friends United meeting heading to?
I don't know.
You may not know, but from somehow, what do you think? In not really defining, but just your thoughts.
I think that Friends United Meeting can find a place as a kind of middle ground. I think that that's what it's tried to be in a lot of ways since the 1960s. Um, there are always going to be some friends who find issues going up on which they can compromise. That they must be part of a Quaker organization that will, without reserve, affirm Jesus Christ as a personal savior, or they must be part of a Quaker organization that is actively opposed to every form of homophobia, transphobia, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think FUM can be that, but I think that there is a big space in there in which friends of goodwill can try to meet and find ways to work together. Easier said than done, I know.
Any other questions for Tom? Well, if you do have questions, you can find his contact information.
TomH@earlham.edu.
And I was just gonna say, if you want more, like if you want to know the history of your monthly meeting, he sometimes can help you with that, or your yearly meeting. I mean, any of those kinds of questions, and he can be a guest speaker for any kind of historical topic. So.
I live to answer questions.
Next meeting, do we get a half a day at least with Tom?
Yeah,
Half an hour?
you know,
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom,
I do have a day-long version.
Yeah.
Sean,
Yes.
instead of the general secretary's report, we'll just have Tom come in and talk.
Hey.
I